What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, it's some of my final thoughts ahead of the Gameweek 15 deadline. So I'm going to go through some of the latest press conference updates and your questions as well. So if you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a like. And if you haven't done so already, hit subscribe as well. Now, who else could we start with other than Erling Haaland? We have heard from Pep Guardiola today, and I took the quotes from Fantasy Football Scout. We know they've got Fulham at home this week, followed by Brentford at home in Gameweek 16. So ideally, we want him to play because he would be the best captain for both of those weeks, given the fixtures and given just how good he's been. So these are the full quotes, and realistically, I didn't expect much else from Pep, if I'm honest. And some of what he said is similar to last week, but there are some positives, right? So he said he is much better. We will decide today. It's a good step. Start to train. Now we have training this afternoon, and we will see. So he said that last week. He was feeling better, not necessarily 100%, and they would see after training. So there's nothing in here about him not being 100%. I'm sure he's still trying to recover, but he didn't say that this week. That could be a good thing. And also, we know he's back in team training now because we saw the video that the Man City Twitter account posted yesterday. Because earlier on in the week, when Pep was talking ahead of the Champions League game, I don't think he was in training at that point, but now he is. So that's a positive sign. Then he was asked, and I've seen this clip as well on social media, what is being taken into account to decide whether to play him against Fulham? So he said his opinion, so that's Haaland's own opinion on whether or not he can play, the doctor's opinion, and if he's good for 90 minutes or just less minutes. Now, that does sound kind of positive, right? Can we play him for 90 or does it need to be a little bit less? But also, less minutes could be 0, right? He could just not play at all. So it's not a guarantee. We will see after training. I do think this is a little bit more positive than last week, but it's obviously not telling us one way or another whether he's going to play at all, either on the bench and then come on for a bit or start from the beginning, or whether he's just going to miss out completely. So the key question is, what do we do if we don't get early team news tomorrow? I'm hopeful we'll get it again and we can just make our decision based on, the most amount of information possible. What if we don't get that team lineup league? Or what if you just want to make the decision tonight and just enjoy your Saturday, enjoy your Sunday without worrying about what team league may or may not come out? So I think this is enough for me to probably not sell him, unless it's confirmed he's out of the squad, in which case I probably will take that hit I talked about, going Haaland to a cheaper forward, probably Alvarez if he starts, otherwise Callum Wilson, and then getting Kevin De Bruyne in for Saka or Zaha. So I'll talk about that later. That's if he's not in the squad at all, and that's confirmed. But otherwise, I think I've just got to keep him, and I may even captain him at this point, because I do think there is a chance that he's going to start if he's available. I don't think he's going to last 90 minutes, right? I don't think even if the club doctors said he's okay for 90 minutes, they probably still won't risk him for that. But 65 minutes against Fulham is probably enough to get a few returns. And given the fixtures that the rest of my side at least has, and a lot of you'll be in the same position, I don't really mind doing that, right? If it was Haaland maybe for 50 to 60 minutes, or, Salah or Kane or someone like that against Nottingham Forest at home, maybe there's a tougher question there and a tougher decision. But given the fixture, I'm probably at this point going to put the captaincy armband on him unless we know for sure that he's benched. I'm just going to take that risk and make sure I've got a good vice captain. So that's all we're going to get, I think, unless we get a lineup leak later, unless there's something else in the embargoed quotes that tend to come out at 10:30 p.m. UK time on Friday. But often it's not really just more information. It's usually a different topic that, the managers were asked about. So I'm not really expecting too much more. But I think at this point it's a difficult sell, because if he is getting closer and closer to being back into the squad and starting, that means he's going to be even closer in game week 16, and he looks like a great captaincy option. I think if you already got rid of him last week and we don't get any more news, you could use that as an excuse not to buy him. But for those of us that kept him, I think we've just got to keep hold of him at this point. So fingers crossed he starts. If he doesn't, so be it. A lot of people are in the same position anyway. Just make sure you got your vice captain locked in. If he comes off the bench, it's not necessarily going to be the end of the world because of the fixture. But hopefully we do get some team news tomorrow. And obviously I'll be tracking all that on the deadline stream. But for those of you that don't want to obviously watch that, or you don't want to wait for leaks and stuff like that, you've just got to make your decision based off this information. I think it's a keep at this point. So Pep was also asked why Foden had been benched recently in the Premier League. Now, it's quite a long answer. The first paragraph essentially is just pointing out that lots of other players have also been benched at times this season. Mahrez, Grealish, Bernardo Silva, Gundogan, and even Kevin De Bruyne, right? Then he goes on to say, if you say particularly, it's no absolute issue. So I haven't seen this question, but I would assume he asked for a particular reason why he was benched. There's no absolute issue. I have many players, I have to use them. We know all about Pep Roulette and rotation and stuff like that, and I demand the best of them. Now, you could say that was maybe sending a message to Phil Foden. I demand the best, and you're not giving me that right now. That is just guesswork, right? We don't know that for sure, but who knows? Maybe there's a hidden message to Phil Foden there, and this is going to happen in the future. It's always been like that. We know he likes to rotate, and also it's not necessarily always, you play Champions League, then you miss Premier League, then you play Champions League. It doesn't always work like that. Sometimes players will play like 3, 4, 5, 6 games in a row and then be benched for whatever reason it might be. He goes on to say, in Dortmund, for example, we played to qualify first. We know how important it is to top in the group in the Champions League. Kevin De Bruyne didn't play 1 minute, so it happened. So in the second paragraph, it's almost like there's no real absolute issue of why it's happening. He demands the best. Maybe that's a hidden message. But then it's kind of saying at the end that anyone can get benched, even if it's like a game that we really need to win, right? Which obviously every game is, but you kind of get the point. So I'm not quite sure, based on that, what I would do with Foden. I think if you don't own him, and I am in that position, and I do have the money to bring him in for Zaha or Saka, I'm probably just not going to do it unless we get early team use. So I just don't want to take that risk, because I do feel like a player that was pretty much nailed has now missed 2 games in a row. That can happen under Pep, like he says, but it still puts me off enough, I think, to buy him. Like, I'd be taking out a player that's almost guaranteed to start for one I'm not quite sure about. If you own him, it gets even more difficult. I think unless there's a midfielder you absolutely want, you can probably keep hold of him just because of how good the fixture is. Like, Saka's got Chelsea away, Zaha's away to West Ham. Maybe you're looking at Bowen, maybe you're looking at Rashford or someone like that. I think if I had Foden and we got no news, I would probably keep him. It obviously takes him out of the captaincy conversation, and I do think the likes of Haaland, De Bruyne or Foden, any of them if they start, could be potential captaincy options. I know everyone's going to go for Haaland if he does, but if he wasn't to play, if he was benched and Foden did start, he could be a captaincy instead. But unless you know for sure, I just don't think you can put the armband there. So for me, he's one of... I know this is so cliche in FPL, but I think he's one of those don't buy, don't sell, and don't captain. Obviously, if you're missing a player in midfield that you really want, or you've got money to upgrade Foden to De Bruyne, for example, that could be a good move if we don't get any further information. But because the fixture is so good, I would probably just keep him. I do think there's plenty of goals in that game for City against Fulham. So some of you might have noticed that Callum Wilson has been yellow flagged on FPL ahead of the Gameweek15 deadline. This tweet from Fantasy Football Scout should mostly put your mind at ease if you're thinking about bringing him in or if you've already moved early on him. So Howe added that Callum Wilson should be fine for Sunday's game after the forward had mentioned he's been suffering from a cold earlier this week. Now, to be fair, on paper, Southampton away and Chelsea at home doesn't look that great, but I think for 7.5 million or below, there's not a huge amount of other forwards to choose from that are either, playing in as good a team, are nailed on, are fully fit, have got penalties and all that kind of stuff. So I still think Callum Wilson looks pretty good for 15 and 16, and I don't think I would let this put me off buying him. There was kind of a little bit more. I searched on Twitter for any more quotes. So Neil from Fantasy Football Scout said, this is the exact quote from Eddie Howe on Callum Wilson. I think he's okay. He's had a little cold. It's funny how everything gets around, doesn't it? Especially when you're doing a podcast, I suppose. But yeah, fingers crossed he'll be okay. So Callum Wilson was actually on a podcast, and I think there's a tweet here from Andy Parker, FPL_Andy P. So he was on BBC Sound's Footballers Football podcast, and this is what Wilson actually said on that podcast. I'm feeling a little bit run down this week, so need to make sure this illness doesn't kick in fully and I clear it out. So I guess you have to say he is a little bit of a doubt. He's not 100%. We'd rather have not heard this before we have to buy him. But if I had to guess, I still think he's going to start against Southampton. He's playing really well. He's going to want to do everything he can to kind of impress maybe one more time before that England squad is announced. I don't think, for what it's worth, it's going to make much of a difference in who Gareth Southgate picks. But who knows, right? He's going to want to play. It's just a cold. I mean, colds can make you feel pretty bad, right? Sometimes, especially if it's like a heavy one. And I'm sure that's not great. But, you know, there's no Isak or anyone like that. I think he's probably going to play, right? If you don't want to take any risks whatsoever, you could go elsewhere. But, yeah, I still personally think he's probably okay to bring in. Alright, I'll try and answer this one as quickly as possible because we have already covered it this week. But every time I ask for questions, it keeps coming up, right? So would you bring in Diogo Dalot against Aston Villa with him on 4 yellow cards? The short answer is no, I wouldn't, right? I don't think it's worth taking the risk. Sometimes there'll be a player that has such good fixtures or has such high points expectations from us that it might be worth taking that risk on them, even though they're close to suspension. I just don't see that with Dalot. Is he going to score, if he plays both games, that many more points than the other players that I've got on screen, Dunk, Zuma and Luke Shaw? I'm just not convinced he will, and I don't think it's worth taking the risk. It is a little bit annoying because if he gets through 15 okay, then Game Week 16 doesn't really matter. If he picks up a yellow card ahead of Game Week 17, we've got unlimited transfers anyway, so you can either choose him, you could go for a different Man United defender. And I do think if everyone was on 0 yellows and you really wanted a Man United defender, Dalot probably is the best option from an FPL perspective. But again, it comes back to whether it's worth taking that risk. And if you want to play this defender for the next 2 game weeks, and then they get suspended, you've got to use another transfer on a defender, that's a little bit annoying. Maybe if you've got someone on your bench that you could play in 16 if Dalot gets suspended, that wouldn't be the end of the world. But ultimately, if you really want to cover Man United defence, you can just go for Luke Shaw instead. Bearing in mind, they do have 2 away games. They are defending well. Casemiro has help, but it is 2 away games. Zuma or even Cresswell at West Ham, 2 home games. Palace at home, Leicester at home. They've defended very well so far this season. Or you could go and back the Brighton defence, which is also a pretty solid defence, which is as good, if not has been slightly better over maybe the last season or so than Man United. So someone like Dunk, I've got Webster, they've got Wolves away and then Aston Villa at home. Fixture-wise, Brighton and maybe West Ham probably trump Man United anyway. So I do think Dalot is a good pick. I don't personally think it's worth taking the risk at this stage. So I'm going to talk about my specific team, transfer thoughts and captaincy later on. But I do have this exact dilemma about Zaha, whether or not to stick or twist. And he has been frustrating. I do think that sometimes our expectations of certain players are a bit high. But I think he's only got like 1 goal, 1 assist in the last 7 games. So that's not necessarily ideal. And we know that both the remaining fixtures until the World Cup for Palace are both away from home, right? So it's West Ham away and then Nottingham Forest away. And don't get me wrong, I can't sit here and say West Ham away is a really good fixture because I've just said I think Zuma's not a bad option to bring in. Now, both of those things can be true, right? Zaha can be an okay option this week and Zuma can also be an okay option in defence, but it's going to go one way or another, right? Unless Zuma scores and Zaha scores. But I think, and I've kind of stuck to this narrative ever since game weeks 9 or 10, I think it still holds true, that Zaha's just not someone right now, while the fixtures look like this, that you're ever going to need to force out of your team. So if you do have other things to deal with, I think it's perfectly okay to hold on to Zaha. And I'm not saying that Nottingham Forest away, having to go to the City ground is going to be easy, but I still don't think it would put me off having to play an attacker in that fixture, right? So I think Zaha's perfectly okay to hold. Realistically, I mean, this is the dilemma every single week, right? Who are you looking to bring in instead? So if we look at some of the options, right? Phil Foden, I may still do Zaha to Foden, but at this stage, because of the last 2 game weeks where he's been benched, unless we get early team news to confirm that Foden is starting, I'm just not sure I can take that risk that he's going to be benched, right? I've used 1 transfer to bring Foden in, another one to take him out. I don't want to use another transfer to bring him back in, only to have him benched again. So that one's a little bit tricky for me. You could move to Saka. Now, I would say Saka, underlying numbers, expected goals, expected assists are better. He's also on penalties, playing in a team that's going to score more goals. I do think Saka versus Zaha, Saka is the better option, but Arsenal's fixtures, you could argue, are slightly more difficult, right? Because they've got Chelsea away this week, then Wolves away. That is probably a little harder than West Ham away and Nottingham Forest away, but I would say because Saka is a better option, they kind of even themselves out. So if you wanted to do Zaha to Saka, it's an okay move, But that's about all. It's like it's fine. Yeah, it's fine to do that. It doesn't feel that exciting. It doesn't feel like a move that's necessarily going to get me a lot more points. And similar with Bowen, right? We don't know if he's on penalties anymore. I'd probably say he's not. I think Ben Rama's done okay with them. Lanzini, if he was on the pitch, would probably take them ahead, but he doesn't get many minutes. Skamaka might even get a chance before Bowen does. So he's okay because he's got 2 home games. Palace at home and Leicester at home, and I wouldn't mind having him for them. But again, it just feels like an okay move. I want like a big upgrade if I'm going to make a move for Zaha out. And then similar for Rashford, right? It's 2 away games for Man United as well. He is playing well at the moment. He did get a little bit of a rest in Europe. He did come on in the second half, but it's not like he played the whole game for 90 minutes. He is it looks like he's being managed at the moment. I do think he'll start the last 2 fixtures. So that's kind of where my head is at with Zaha right now. There's other options you could bring in. Trossard, Almiron, for example, but none of them, to me at least, feel like they're massive upgrades on Zaha. Obviously, if you've got the money to go to De Bruyne or something like that, that's a brilliant upgrade, and I would definitely want to do that this week to get my third City player in, because he got rested in the Champions League, so he's almost certainly going to start. But other than that, I don't know, call it gut feeling or whatever you want. I just think unless you're going to a Man City midfielder, I just don't know if there's too many others that excite me that much to swap Zaha for. And don't get me wrong, in my own team, and I'll talk about this later, I'm not that confident in Zaha's points. It's just that I'm not necessarily massively confident in anyone else's either. Like, even if we look at 8.8 or below, like maybe I'm still just downplaying Almiron too much. Maybe he's just a brilliant option and you should forget the price and just bring him in. Southampton away, Chelsea at home is okay. But I want someone with like Man City's fixtures, Fulham at home, Brentford at home, Nottingham Forest at home, Leeds at home, those kind of combinations. Even Leicester, even if you wanted to go to Madison, Everton away, West Ham away. I don't know. Let me know down in the comments below if I'm kind of, underestimating some of the players we could bring in for Zaha. But I just feel like it's not one of those situations where as soon as I take him out, he'll score. But I do think he's just someone you can easily hold on to up until the unlimited transfers. And who knows, maybe that Nottingham Forest game will be a bit more open. Nottingham Forest will think they can go and beat Palace at home. Maybe that'll give Zaha more space. I don't know. Maybe I'm just talking absolute rubbish. But I'm just looking down this list of midfielders and just nothing's jumping out at me. Like Bowen, on paper, yeah, Palace at home and Leicester at home, that's pretty good. Is it worth a transfer? I don't know. I guess it depends what else you can do with your squad, right? If you're in a position where everything else looks good, then maybe you could just make a luxury move of Zaha to Saka or Zaha to Bowen or Zaha to Rashford, whoever you kind of fancy bringing in this week. But if you've got other stuff to deal with and there's other stuff you could do next week that's more interesting, I'd honestly probably just keep hold of him at this point. Alright, so we've heard the press conferences. What am I going to do with my own team? I've only got one free transfer. I think this is going to quickly turn into me just thinking out loud, probably a bit of a ramble. So if you don't want to hear any more of that, feel free to switch off. With Zaha and Saka, I do think if I'm going to remove one, it's going to be Zaha over Saka. I think I would prioritise keeping the Arsenal man. There's not much in it, to be honest with you, but he's probably the one I would want to keep. But I only think I'm going to sell Zaha if I can get a Man City midfielder in that I do want, right? Because I could go Trossard or Rashford or someone like that, and they might do well, but I don't necessarily think, like I've just said, that they're much better than Zaha. Now, if Foden was starting, he'd probably be the one that I would go for. I've got a bit of money in the bank and I could afford to do that. If he doesn't start, Grealish doesn't excite me that much. I don't think I want to take a punt there. But if Mahrez was starting, for example, that is something that I could be interested in as a 1 week punt. I think it's unlikely, but if we get the team news that he is starting, that is a massive differential because he's going to be so low owned that I could go for him. And the reason that I'm kind of more open into doing a move like that in Game Week 15 is, one, we only have Game Week 16 left before I get to reset my team anyway. But also, and this might sound a bit weird, because of my defenders, I'm pretty much happy to play any of my defenders that I currently own in Game Week 16. And that allows me to maybe do something a bit different this week. So if I did Zaha to Foden or Zaha to Mahrez, and it turned out in Game Week 16 I needed to use a transfer to go somewhere else, I should, in theory, without loads of injuries and suspensions, be able to do that because Trent Alexander-Arnold has Southampton at home in Game Week 16. And look, I'm not saying he's a great option. You shouldn't buy him or anything like that, but I'm happy to play him in that fixture. Cancelo, we know has got Brentford at home. I don't think Trippier against Chelsea at home is necessarily that exciting. I think Chelsea could score in that game, but he's been so good, I don't really want to bench him anyway. Webster's got Villa at home, like I already spoke about as well. Sorry, this fixture here. And then even Gay, okay, it's an away game, but it's Nottingham Forest away. If I had to play him, it wouldn't be that bad. So if, for example, I did Zaha to a Man City midfielder, they then weren't an option in game week 16, and Mitrovic gets booked this week, which, by the way, he's on 4 yellow cards. I didn't realise that till I was recording the video the other day. I wouldn't be forced necessarily into using a transfer on him or the midfielder, because I could just play one of my defenders instead. Don't get me wrong, it's not exciting to play defenders, but the option is there. And obviously that kind of safety buffer lets me maybe do something different this week. So that is an option, Zaha to a Man City midfielder. But let's say we don't get early team news, I would probably just hold on to him. So my only other real two options that I see are Salah to De Bruyne. But if we don't get any news about Haaland, I'm probably just going to captain him. So do I really need to worry about bringing in Kevin De Bruyne when I think that Salah in game week 16 is a better option? Not this week, but next week he is. So I don't really want to use a transfer on him either. Or it's Mitrovic to Wilson. Now, I've said I don't think I would let that put me off, but maybe for me it will slightly, because I don't necessarily need to make that move. Mitrovic is not someone that I feel needs to be forced out of my team. So let's say I don't do Salah to De Bruyne, I don't do Mitrovic to Wilson, and I don't get rid of Zaha. What do I do? Now, I could roll the transfer and go into game week 16 with 2 free transfers, wait and see if there's any injuries, any suspensions, any managers that possibly talk about rest and rotation because of the World Cup. I'm not expecting that to happen, but I could give myself that extra week to find out. But then I look at the fixtures, and I don't really know what I'm going to do with 2 free transfers. So one thing that sticks out to me is Nunez against Southampton at home. That could be a good punt. But to be able to afford that, I've got to get rid of Haaland. That's not going to happen. Or I've got to downgrade the likes of Salah or Trent. And they're obviously in that same fixture, Southampton at home. So I'm probably not going to want to do that, right? So Nunez isn't an option. I could go for Calvert-Lewin against Bournemouth, but then I could get Calvert-Lewin this week for Mitrovic. If I didn't want to get Wilson, I could take a punt on Mitrovic to Calvert-Lewin, who has, I think it's Leicester at home this week. Yeah, Leicester at home this week, and then Bournemouth away in game week 16. So maybe he's the punt to go for. But in terms of chances created, Newcastle are way ahead of Everton. So, I mean, it's okay. It's Bournemouth away, but again, it's not a home game. Doesn't really excite me that much. Again, we could be looking at midfield. It could be Bowen against Leicester. I'm probably not that interested in Chelsea attackers right now. I've already got Martinelli and Saka there. Man City, we're going to be in exactly the same position. We're going to be waiting for early team news in game week 16, and maybe I go for a different midfielder or something like that. Maybe Alvarez starts even with Haaland. Maybe he's a punt. But I guess the point I'm trying to make is, and maybe in a bad way or maybe a long-winded way, and I could be wrong, I don't see any fixtures here where they've got players that I'm going to need 2 free transfers to shift funds around. Or if I do, like Nunez, I don't have a way to get the funds that I like. I don't want to sell Trent or Salah before Southampton at home, realistically. You know, even like Harry Kane against Leeds, that could be an option, but there's no easy way to get to him without selling Salah. And again, I just don't think that's worth using a transfer on. So if I wanted to go for a Man United player against Fulham, okay, Bruno Fernandes and Ronaldo are probably out of my reach price-wise. Rashford isn't. If Martial was fit, he's also an option. I could do Mitrovic to Martial, for example. So I feel like, and again, maybe I'll have this wrong, any player that I'm realistically going to want in game week 16, I don't need to find funds for. I've already got a route to them, which tells me that this week I can make a luxury transfer if I want to. There's not really that much that excites me this week either if I don't know which Man City midfielder is playing, right? It's Mitrovic to Calvert-Lewin or Mitrovic to Wilson. The one thing that I would be kind of interested in doing in game week 15 is Mitrovic to Bamford for Bournemouth at home, use him as a 1-week punt, and then go for a different punt in game week 16. But the problem is, because of fitness, Bamford's not guaranteed to start, and even if he does, I don't think he's made it over 70 minutes, apart from once so far this season. So his minutes aren't even secure, even if he starts. So he hasn't started the last 2, 64, 61. Like 83 minutes in game week 1. That's the only time he's gone over 64 minutes. So, I mean, that is the definition of a punt, I guess. You don't know if he's going to start, and if he does, you don't know if he's going to be on the pitch. But it's just not something I want to do. So, even with 1.3 million in the bank, I just don't see anything that exciting. So I think it will be a wait and see whether there's Man City news, and then I can get rid of Zaha for a Man City midfielder. And if it is someone that doesn't start in game week 16, then I just move on to another midfielder, either Bowen or Rashford or Trossard or someone like that. Otherwise, it's Mitrovic to Wilson. I think right now, that is probably the move that I will make. Mitrovic to Wilson and just keep Zaha in. I think unless we get any more news about Haaland, what I've heard from Pep Guardiola gives me enough confidence that he's going to be involved in the squad. I don't think he's guaranteed to start for what it's worth, but I think it's worth taking the risk on the armband. If you had De Bruyne and Haaland, that's a different conversation. I think if I had that, and we had no more news on Haaland, I probably would captain De Bruyne, get that guaranteed start, and if Haaland is on the bench and comes on for a cameo, absolutely happy days for you. So that's where I'm at right now. I may well have missed something. If I have missed something about my own team, please do leave me a comment below. Like I said, one free transfer, and I've got, 1.3 million in the bank. So you got any better ideas than me, please let me know. I'm not going to sell Danny Ward. It's just not worth it at this point. I'm going to keep him for the last 2 fixtures. If you've enjoyed that video, please do give it a like, hit that subscribe button. I'll be back tomorrow for the deadline stream. Remember, the deadline's a little bit later tomorrow. It's 1:30 UK time ahead of the 4 matches that are on at 3 o'clock. So we'll be looking for early team news there. Hopefully we get it. If we don't, we'll have to make some decisions without it. And who really cares about that? We've done that plenty of times before. It's not the end of the world. So thank you for watching. Give it a like, hit subscribe, and I'll catch you again soon.